Hello everyone, and welcome to the 5th edition of our online seminar called Semiospheres. The seminar is part of a master's program called Semiotics, Language and Advertising, which is led by Professor Milena Popova. And I'm basically the host and organizer of this series of events, in which we try to invite also more people who work with visual language, silence narratives, as we see the title of Vyara's presentation. Our speaker today will be Vyara Boyadjieva, who is a very, very talented and award-winning illustrator. And I'm a huge fan of her, so this is also another reason why we decided to get her today. So yes, the master's program is very much focused on language theory, but not so much on visuals. We have one course which is on cinema language, which is very, very interesting. But I think so far illustration has remained under the radar. So that is why we have invited Vyara to tell us a bit more about her work. And she proposed this, I think, fascinating topic, which is silent narratives and visual narration. So narration without words, if I have understood correctly. Great. So Vyara, I will shut up now and give you the floor. The format of the series is the following. You will have between 30 and 40 minutes for your presentation. If it's shorter, it's also fine. If it is longer, I will intervene very rudely and tell you that you have first 5 and then 2 minutes. And afterwards, we will open the floor for questions and answers from the audience. You're also all very welcome to write questions as they appear in your head in the chat session. And we will, of course, transmit them to Vyara. You can also just raise your hand and speak afterwards, whatever you feel comfortable with. So yeah, Vyara, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation, Julia. Thank you for inviting me to this seminar. It's a pleasure. Do you all hear me very well? Do you hear me? Yeah, is everything all right?
I at least hear you. I don't know.
Okay. So I have shared my screen. And yeah, today I will try to briefly speak about wordless picture books, also called silent narratives. But first, let's start with one question. What is actually a visual narration in the context of picture books? So some of you might know, for those who don't, picture books are made of two art. They're composed of the verbal art, the written part, and the visual art, the visual part. And together they have a counter dynamic, a crossover dynamic, which makes them interdependent. They depend on each other, and so it means that the words shouldn't be repeating what the illustration says, and the opposite, and vice versa. So also it's a sequential art. It means that it's seen and it's read in a sequential, meaning that one illustration, if taken out of the book, wouldn't make sense by itself. It makes sense as a whole with all the other illustrations. So this is what we call the sequential art, as cinema and animation as well. But let's say that illustration is something like the mother of animation. But if the image says the same thing as the text, we speak about redundancy. So this is something that illustrators usually avoid to do. They avoid to give the same information as the text. So yeah, this is a very brief introduction to what picture books are. So what is sequential art made of? Closures. So what you see here are vignettes. What is drawn are vignettes. And what closures are the blank gaps between the vignettes. And this is what sequential art is basically. Essentially is the imagination glue. What you have in yourself, in your mind, while reading the vignette. So you are the one making the narration fluid. You're the one who are making the who are connecting and linking the vignettes between each other. So you're making the narration. And this is what, yeah, closures are. But in wordless picture books, you're going to see closures have a different form. So yeah, wordless picture books are a subgenre of picture books. Very undervalued, very underrated. And they too have closures, but not with vignettes, because we're not talking about comic books. The closures in wordless picture books is the turning of the page. So this is where you come to play a role actually in the narration of the story, and you're the one who has to add up to the missing elements of the story, because the illustrator or the author have chosen a very particular set of scenes, and you're the one who subconsciously, actually, it's a very easy and natural thing that we do, you're creating filling the gaps between these scenes. So yeah, this turning of the page often creates suspense, a surprise, a repetition, and yeah, this is basically the closures in wordless picture books. But what are essentially wordless picture books? The first one is said to be published in 1777 by Thomas Bewick, and it was basically only a series of unrelated images without text. This is it. But then in the 60s, people started to use wordless picture books with educational purposes. They wanted to teach children to describe what's in the image and to yes, describe and discuss what's in the image. But it's only in the 70s that wordless picture books started to actually shift from describing to actually telling a story. So many more things come into play, like imagination, creativity, empathy, and so on and so forth. So yes. So are images the only tools to tell a story? Well, no. There's an ongoing discussion between academics about the title of wordless picture books, because it's more relevant to say that they must be called almost wordless picture books, because they all have what we call the paratextual component. They have end papers, they have the title page, a title on the front cover, and some text maybe on the back cover, we don't know. So yeah, it's their most relevant title must be almost wordless picture books. But yeah, their names, we call them different names, like silent narratives and so on. But this actually is one exception. A Day on the Beach, as you see here. The publisher was bold enough to publish it like this, without any text on the front cover and on the back cover, and putting only the title and the author and the name of the publisher on the spine here. So yeah, it's very interesting. Why they're underrated is because I think for many reasons. I think the mass has a misconceived conception of visual art, visual communication, and they are regarding it as not educational for children, and as maybe even regressive if we take the example of comic books in the market. So if maybe you've seen this, but there's a progression in age. With progression in age, the books lose the images and gain more text. And so it's a sad thing, because we're teaching children to judge nonverbal semiotic systems as unimportant. And And it's not true. It's actually very intellectually stimulating. And I think wordless picture books are an example to it. Also, you have to experience it yourself. I can't only explain something verbally that has actually no words. It's paradoxical, but yes, I hope that one day you will experience it by yourself. Yeah, I think this is a very short introduction to wordless picture books. They are not only books with pictures, they have a social awareness. The two projects that I have in mind that I know of are the visual journeys through wordless narratives, organized by Dr. Arispe, and it's involving groups of people from different ethnicities, and they're all reading one silent book. In this case, it's The Arrival by Sean Town. I'm going to show you one example of it. So they all read it together, and they've seen through this project that people who would usually not engage are very engaged in telling the story. And it might be a strategy to help immigrant children learn better and feel more accepted and feel more on the same ground as other children in classrooms. And so it might be a strategy for education. And Destination Lampedusa is by Deborah Soria in 2012. It was presented in the 33rd World Congress of IBI, which is the International Board of Book for Young People. And the whole idea is the creation of the first ever library in Lampedusa for children's books only. And it has 111 titles, but this is in 2012, so I'm not sure if now it doesn't have more titles. And so basically the whole idea again is building a bridge towards immigrant children and making them feel more welcome and making them enjoy picture books as much as their Italian peers, and yeah, many more projects like this, which are very social. So why this whole fascination for silent narratives and observation and contemplation? This is a sketch of mine. So my fascination for this subgenre started, I think, at the beginning of my master's, when I started with the observational drawing module. And I was very touched by the non-verbal communication between me and the model I was drawing, observing, staring at. And I felt a profound meaning of this communication, and I thought that it's underrated that we want to translate and explain everything verbally when there are a lot of ineffable things that must remain as they are, because there's a reason they exist if they don't exist under the form of a verbal communication and semiotic system. So I started drawing people, and I decided to make this project, which is called Mindful the Gap. And the main theme is the gap moments of everyday life. For example, when we are queuing, or we are waiting for someone, or we are in the bus, in the public transport. And what do we do in these moments? Do we try to stimulate ourselves with a phone, or with music, or with whatsoever, something that is outside of us? Or we embrace these moments as moments of contemplation and moments of thought and meditation and so on. And so obviously this contemplative theme is silent, and this is the whole book obviously unfold here. You have to imagine it folded down, and it comes up like a little, it comes up like this, like the image on the right. And so I use the silent form to present this project because for the sake of the idea. And yeah, I felt very stimulated by all the things that I could say without words. For example, I used a different composition because I wasn't helped with words. I had to portray everything. I had to make sure that the message passes without words. So there are a lot of things that could help me, or the opposite. But in this case, I was playing a lot with composition and with the unfolding of the book to create a repetitive, meditative pace to it. So yeah, there are a lot of tools that help you as a visual author to narrate something without words. But again, there's always this ambiguity of the theme. And as a creator, I think it's very humbling to know that you're creating something that offers the reader full interpretation, almost full interpretation, and that it can be mistranslated or misunderstood. And it was very difficult for me as a creator, and it's very difficult for me as a reader when I read wordless picture books. This is why I say that it's actually very intellectually demanding, because you have to be very concentrated, and if you miss a detail, you're going to be confused in the narration, and you have to have a visual literacy in a way to be reading wordless picture books. So yeah, this is when it all started. And we're going to the face. So this is picture 1, 2, 3, 4. So as I told you, one tool that could help you guide the reader throughout the book, if you're not guiding him with words, is the pace and repetition, actually, in this case, because it gives a sense, the reader understands the language and the style of telling the story. It's easier to communicate like this. And repetition is it's very humoristic. It can be very humoristic, and yeah, and it gives a sense of suspense as well. And the author, Di Pacho, in this case, used the gutter of the book as a separation. Well, there's the physical separation being the gutter, but also as separation in the story between the two birds who wanted to show off bringing objects to the tree, and then everything falls off and they're separated again, but without anything. So yeah, there are a lot of tools, but again, there's still lots of room for ambiguity. And yeah, this is what I actually really love about wordless picture books, because it's leaving full freedom to the reader. I could read this story as I wish, basically, and I can read it differently every time I read it. And I think this is it's a very interesting thing if you experience it yourself, to read one wordless picture book in one phase of your life, and then read it in another phase of your life to see how you're going to interpret the images in different ways. And the story most probably is going to change as you're changing. And yeah, so this is a spread from Shantan that I previously mentioned from The Arrival. And so it's a graphic novel, actually. It's not a picture book. A graphic novel is a longer picture book, like, let's say. It's like a comic book. It's between a comic book and a picture book. And so he has used repetition with a purpose here, to give a sense of contemplation again, meditation, because it's the context of the spread is the protagonist is traveling from Europe to the States, and it's a long journey. Well, the States or a foreign country, this is how I interpret it. Nothing tells me that it's the States. From a different country, and so the journey is very long, and this is how he portrays it, by this long ongoing repetition of different clouds, and there's something very meditative about it, you know, seeing them all the same but different at the same time through different moments of the day. And if I want you just to imagine what would be our reading if there was only one cloud, one big spread of one big cloud, the whole idea would be very different. So this is how you tell visually without saying anything. And instead of giving us a big cloud and giving us a sense of impression, he decided to use repetition in this case. So as I previously said, not all wordless picture books are wordless. Sometimes they have a pseudo-verbal system invented by the author or the illustrator, like these two examples. So in this case, the purpose is not communicative, but symbolic, obviously, and it can help. I think it can help the reader grow empathy towards foreigners and towards those who don't understand words by reading without understanding. You know, it's there, it's before you, but it's not accessible to you. You can't get the sense of it, so you have to get the sense through all the context. And this is how I personally learned languages. I've been a foreigner for a long time, and I think these things are very similar, because while you learn languages, you know some words, and then you make the connection as with the as what I said, with the gaps. You fill the gaps, the closures, and this is how you learn languages. You hear one word, you hear another, and then together it kind of create sense. Maybe sometimes not, but hopefully most of the time you kind of understand what the person wants to say. And this is what you do with wordless picture books. You gather one detail, one other detail, and you kind of digest all this, and then you understand the meaning, or a meaning comes to you from inspired by your personal experience and your character and so on. So yeah, it's quite a paradoxical object, the wordless picture books, because it invites you to tell a story. It doesn't mean that this story has to be you know, you have to tell it vocally, you have to say it out loud. But when you translate one system to another, there can be mistranslation very often, and it's a very paradoxical object in the sense that it invites you to do it, but there's a lot of chances that you do it wrong. But who says what is wrong? So there are no wrong answers. But again, we have to be ready to accept that there can be a lot of ambiguity if you want to explain the story verbally, if you want to say it out loud to your children or to yourself. And sometimes I think I personally enjoy reading it without words, actually. Let's say that wordless picture books could be also read in silence by yourselves and as an impression. There's always an explanation in your head, but you don't really follow a thread, a narrative thread verbally with words. But on the other hand, yes, let's read this. If all meanings could be adequately expressed by words, the act of painting and music would not exist. There are values and meanings that can be expressed only by immediately visible and audible qualities, and to ask what they mean in the sense of something can be put into words is to deny their distinctive existence, with which I totally agree. And this is what I just said. And on the other hand, I wanted to say that their picture books very often are compared to cinema because of composition, because of the sequentiality, as I said, because they're very narrative. If they're not narrative, they don't make any sense. It's not fine arts. It does have to tell a story. So very often they're compared to cinema, and actually this is an animation inspired by a wordless picture book, and it's and the drama. The funny thing is that they also inspire children to do the voices and to do the acting and to give the voices to the main characters. And this is what I read from different projects made with children reading wordless picture books. They're at first a little bit confused, but then they easily get into the role, and they easily start playing the game, playing the role, and do the acting. And what they say is that exactly this, you know, do the voices. And these are sentences that are used in drama, I think, and the embodiment of someone else is already teaching you how to empathize with this person. And I think it also gives them a lot of power. It empowers them to do the voices and to have full freedom to make the protagonist say whatever they want and not what is written. So yeah, I think I want to finish with this, that the wordless picture books for me are very intellectually stimulating for both for children and adults, and they're not studied enough. They offer a lot of possibilities, and I think they inspire a lot of yes, empathy, intuition. We use intuition when there are no facts and no concrete facts about something that we want to learn about. And I think intuition is very important for in our personal life, in all areas of our lives. And yes, and it triggers imagination. You're the one who is creating the story. There's no one reading it to you, and you can change it whenever you want. And yeah, I think it's a beautiful tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very, very, very interesting and beautiful, and I really like this illustration. Maybe I should ask you to stop sharing your screen.
Yes, of course.
Yes, so I will be silent now, even though I'm the chair, and will abuse my power at some point, but will remain silent and ask you to maybe ask your questions or interfere with first reactions, impressions, maybe also comments on your experience of reading visual books. I wanted to say, while Vyara was talking, I actually found I have an experience and like my own copy of Mindfulness.
Yeah.
So I will now be very, very adequate and will unfold it probably the wrong way, but as Vyara said, there is no wrong way. So this is how this book looks like in real life. Wait. I have been moving a lot in the recent years, but I actually took it with me on all my travels because I like it. Okay, so you're very, very welcome to ask questions. I saw that someone wrote something in the chat. Yes, so Camille has a question. She says, thank you for the great presentation. If I want to try out the experience of reading, in quotation marks, a wordless picture book, do you have any recommendation of which ones or which are your favorites? Do they exist only in paper or is there also an online version? And I think this is actually a very good question. So to what
Yeah.
extent is this experience also mediated by basically print, and can we have it also online?
I think you can have it online. I'm not sure. I never really searched for online picture books. There must be a version, an online version. I'm almost positive about it. You just need to check, but I'm not sure, because making picture books is an expensive thing to do, and I don't know how much the publishers would earn if they publish it online, so I'm not really sure about it. You have to check. What are my favorites? Well, the Down one is one of my favorites, the one that I showed you. There are many that are very different and specific. Most of them speak about very deep and serious thematics because of this silent aspect of it. You know, silence very often creates confusion and fear. Some people are fascinated by silence, other people try to avoid it because it makes them feel lonely, or they feel lost, they're alone with their thoughts. So I think, yeah, most of the thematics of the wordless picture books are very serious. They're the one with the two pejaritos, with the two birds, is a comical one, but this is an exception. But I think I could send you a list of all the wordless picture books I've used for my essay, because all this presentation comes from an essay. And yeah, it's difficult to have them in my mind now with all the authors, but I will make sure that you will get the list. I could put it also on Facebook on the event.
One idea I was going to suggest is maybe we can just post several of your favorite books on the Facebook event. I would also read this with much interest, because I'm not very experienced. I'm a political scientist, I must say. I wanted to ask you a question, and everyone, please feel free if you want to just unmute yourself or write in the chat. But while you gather braveness, I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned on visual literacy. There is a very interesting book by Alberto Manguel, which is called The History of Reading, which I really recommend. And it actually also starts with a discussion of Codex Serafianos, which I saw you had as an example, which is a fascinating example, by the way, because it's well, I would say it's a nonsensical book, but Vyara would say that this is a wrong reading. It's this almost invented world that we need to interpret, and basically we fill with meaning. But what Manguel writes in his book, in The History of Reading, it's a very interesting example of the so-called poor people's Bibles. I was very shocked by this. Again, I come from a different field. So he discusses a practice that was quite prominent in Europe in early modernity, which was a lot of people were illiterate. And afterwards, centuries afterwards, a lot of Bibles were found that only had pictures. So the stories from the Bible were retold only through visual language, because it was suspected that this is the way these books basically can transmit their message to common people who couldn't read the text of the Bible. And we know that in this period, this was a very foundational. That's probably the one thing that everyone had to know about. And so Manguel discusses this a lot and says that basically these books were with visuals because this is the most easily accessible thing. But it seems to me that the books that you describe, with them, it is not so easily accessible. And you mentioned that we need some visual literacy in order to understand them. They're not so simple. So the idea of the visual Bibles was that they're so simple that everyone would know them. What has happened meanwhile? Was it the fact that literacy became mass spread that led to such a domination of verbal systems and language to the extent that now we actually need to learn how to read visual books again? So I was very interested in your opinion on this. And is it still so intuitive, the visual language, or do we really need to read some visual books before we get grips of how to do it?
So in my opinion, what change came with the Industrial Revolution, when the visual was in mass production, and now we're constantly stimulated by different visual communications, and we've become very efficient in reducing the information that comes actually to us. So we've become very superficial in reading images. So I think this is what makes reading picture books difficult for an adult, even if this adult has a visual literacy, because he has to concentrate fully on every single image, every detail, while we've been trained throughout our year, like throughout our life, to do exactly the same, to be very selective in what comes to us. And in this sense, I think children are more developed and more equipped for reading wordless picture books, because they when we read a picture book, we read at the pace of our reading. So an adult would read it fast because the adult reads fast, and the child would read it slowly because it's attracted by small details, and the pace of the book is not something that is interesting the child. So I think in this sense, children that don't need a visual literacy. For complex wordless picture books like The Arrival by Chantal, I don't think they would understand it, because it's very full of it's very metaphorical, and in the sense, yes, you have to have some visual literacy, but in other situations with other picture books, I don't think I don't. It's very funny. Sometimes you have to have it, sometimes not. And I think in general, adults and children are on the same ground with reading picture books, wordless picture books, especially because I think you are the author of the story, and children love to invent and make the voices. And as when I was a child, I was muting off the TV and I was doing the voices. And this is exactly the same thing. You're just not muting the picture book. And the adults have less imagination, or they're less prone to come up with a story only through images. And this is why actually wordless picture books don't work very well on the market, because adults, I've been told by publishers, because adults simply don't want to have this responsibility that they have to come up with something for the child, that they are the first narrator, and with the child, of course, and they just want to read one story very fast and, you know, turn off the light and say good night, and this is it. And this is why in my presentation I was saying that it's actually more complex, and it's unfair to call the visual communication, visual narration as a regressive, because it's actually demanding a lot of a lot of qualities. So yeah, I think it's just, to answer your question, I think it's just, it depends of the work. It depends of the audience, of the work, and yeah, many factors.
And clearly how tired we are and whether we want to co-create a story or not.
Yeah.
We received 2 questions in the chat that I'm now going to read to you. So Olga asks, what is the origin of the wordless book and how the idea was born? So also, maybe if you don't have the particulars, do you know when it became popular as a genre? Because I think it is definitely gaining traction. And then we have another question, but maybe I'll give you space.
Well, yeah, from the books that I've read, academics don't really know what is the origin of the wordless picture book. What I mentioned is the 1777 first book, which had no particular storytelling line, or it was simply a series of pictures with no text. I don't know what was the purpose of it. It was assembled as a book, that's it. Where you have to fill the huge gaps between these images. But I think it gained popularity, around the 70s. it's very unpopular in Bulgaria. It's very unpopular in the less developed countries. Yeah, I think in countries like France, where they cherish actually visual communication and the visual semiotic system, they an adult would be prone to buy a picture book, you know, for children only for himself. They're ready to give, you know, 25 euros for a book with pictures and no text. Because they find it stimulating, as I said. And I think there's, again, this misconception of what is educational and what is not educational. But I'm not sure they're very popular on the market. Every publisher is still very afraid to publish wordless picture books because they just don't sell well for the reason I told you. I didn't know what the reason was until I asked one publisher, and he was very honest with me. He just said, listen, the parents just don't want to tell the story, and this is, yeah, but as I told you again, they're very encouraging and very, they give a positive, there's a positive outcome of them using them as social tools, as I said, in classrooms with foreigners. And by the way, if you want to buy one, you can buy it from whatever country you want because there's no words. So yeah, no limitations in this ground. But yeah, no one knows the origin of the book, of the wordless, of this subgenre. I think, yeah, in the 70s, they started using them as a narrative tool and not as a description tool, educational tool, just to describe the picture. So I think around the 70s in Western Europe, they started using it as narration, as a storytelling tool.
Interesting. So if this is the Olga, I think it is, she's part of the master's program and she's actually a cinema director. So I think there are also very interesting parallels between, as you mentioned, cinema and wordless picture books.
Yes, definitely.
And also while you were speaking, I was thinking that France is also a country with, and also Belgium, for example, there are countries with very strong comic book tradition.
Yeah, Belgium. Yeah, the Frank.
It is the right order. Sorry, that's right. So I think it's probably also a matter of tradition of having these visual images. I'm noticing that like recently, at least in countries like Germany, a lot of books on philosophy started appearing in a graphic format, but they still have text. I mean, they're not wordless picture books. Yeah. We had another question in the chat, actually, two. I think one of it you kind of preempted, which was, are there any children wordless books on the Bulgarian market?
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually have one answer, but I'll let you answer first. You're the expert, and then I leave my non-expert.
Yes, there is The Balcony, Balkonat, by Kalina Mukhova. She's a friend of mine. She's a very good illustrator. Published with Tochica. Julia is actually published with Tochica as well. And yeah, I think it's one of the only wordless picture books in Bulgaria, maybe the only one, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest the same book. It actually has words, though, as Vyara mentioned. They're almost wordless books because it is based on a poem by a poet, Atanas Dauchev, and I think the poem is somewhere, I think, on the back cover of the book.
So the poem is at the end of the story. So you go through the story only with the help of images, and at the end, when you already have the whole story in your head and you already have your suppositions and ideas, you read the poem of this Bulgarian poet. And this is how, yeah, you can agree with your interpretation of the pictures, or you can. It's yours.
And actually also Vyara is a very, very good author of wordless picture books. And I actually wanted to ask you to tell us a bit more about your experience of writing in Duli, which is, well, drawing in Duli. You see how I immediately said writing, which is, slip of tongue. But just to continue this, because we had a question again from Camille, and I think very, very straight on point. So she wants to know whether, so when you paint or draw a book, do words pop in your head? Do you tell a story to yourself, or is the process 100% visual? And are you able to avoid the inner wordy voice? And I think this is a very good question. So
Yeah,
thank you.
very. I actually wrote about this in the essay, but I didn't have the time to say anything today on the presentation. But in every process, every picture book making process, there are words, and I actually don't avoid the inner wordy voice. It's just that it's not. I don't need to put it into a complex phrase. It's just, for example, when I also, for instance, my observational drawings, when I go out and sketch people, what I love to do is listen. I never listen to music, so I listen to whatever they say and whatever I hear from the surroundings, and I write down. Actually, I do write when I draw, and I write down what I hear, and very often what I write and what is on the image has nothing to do, because I've drawn someone, and someone else on the back of my head has said something else, and this is very stimulating for imagination and to create, to link these two together and to make a story out of it. So in the process of making a picture book, there is always some space for words. I help myself remember things. I write down ideas. I write down information about the composition. I write down some editing phrases, what I need to edit. It's not poetry, but it's words still. So it has nothing literary to it. It has no artistic value, but it has the purpose of helping me going through the. Actually, the more I have it clear for myself, the whole book, the better it would be for the ones who are never going to read my notes. So it has to be clear enough to be able to read it without the notes. So yeah, I don't avoid using words when in the process. I just want to see how I can fix the lack of words when I need to communicate through a drawing. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
I actually just also sent in the chat the link to Induli, your book, and also to the balcony. And I also wanted to ask you about Induli, which is an extremely beautiful book, and I think you already won an award with it, etc. Can you tell us a bit more? What were the most unexpected readings of it that you found? Because I think I'd seen an early stage of the process of creating it, and I remember I didn't immediately interpret it closely even to what the original idea was, which of course I feel empowered after your presentation to assist in my right as the reader. But can you tell us a bit more about the process of creating Induli, and what were the strangest readings you have received of it? And if you're interested, you can check. This is the first thing I sent in the...
Yes. Well, on Behance. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, to tell you what were the crazy interpretations, I need to explain what my interpretation was of Induli. It's the story of a man who rebels and steals a goat and goes on partying with friends to show that he has gotten this goat, this gift that maybe wasn't his. And the goat gets stolen from him because there's envy in the world and we can't keep things for ourselves forever. And he realizes this, and he realizes his loneliness and his act of rebellion, and he goes back to the same place where he stole the goat. And actually this place is a hill personified by a person that's called Induli, which means hill in Xhosa, one of the South African languages. And so this was essentially my story. The craziest thing that has been told to me, well, it's not crazy, it's all very, because of the seriousness of the theme, there can be some humoristic interpretations of it. But the funny things that I have heard is the man being the goat and him being transformed into the goat, or the man being the heel, he's seeing himself in the heel. And this is actually very interesting because well, I'm not doing any psychoanalysis on my friends, but it's funny that they see the two protagonists as one same person. And nothing in the book says that it's wrong. And I was just listening and I was, you know, yeah, I agree. Why not? Why not? It's absolutely, it makes sense if you read it this way as well. But yeah, I think this was one of that gave me this impression of being very personal. I think a very personal reading to the story. And again, what I really love with wordless picture books is that it's inevitably personal, because no one's telling you what to think. You are completely responsible of what you're reading visually. And yeah, this is what I love. It's, you're completely free and it can be whatever you want. And it really depends on your maturity, I think, and your curiosity as well. So yeah, I think, yeah, this was, but I haven't given it to many people yet because it's not published for the reasons I told you. Actually, publishers want to add text because they love the images and they want to sell the book. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to break down. I don't know if I'm going to listen to them. But for the moment, yeah, it hasn't been read by many people because it's just not available to everyone. It's just at home with me. And yeah, it's a pity because picture books is giving art to people and making art accessible to everyone. And I would love Induli to be accessible to everyone, but for the moment, yeah, I need a publisher to be, I need the bridge, the commercial bridge from home to the people's homes. So yeah, for the moment, it's only read by some people like yourself, Julia. Yeah.
I also forwarded the link to an interview with you on the book, and yeah, I think that the commercial bridge are very much the words on the base of what you're
right.
telling.
Yes.
It will be interesting. We need to do a follow up and understand and to follow what has happened. And also, I really like the idea of using wordless books as a Rorschach test to uncover our deep psychological interpretations. I think I just didn't quite get it, but I didn't verbalize what I thought about it, which is good because I know I would have been.
But when you read it, it was still a very early stage, so don't worry. Maybe now you're going to get it.
Let's hope so. Okay, so I urge everyone, if you have some last questions, now is the moment to write them in our chat, or you can also appear with, yes, sorry, we have a person with a camera, a brave one.
Just a few words. Yeah. Just a few words. I would like to thank Vyara for this refreshing change of perspective, because I have to admit that I'm a little bit prejudiced and biased because I'm a linguist, and I have been teaching my students for years that there is a big difference between language, which is the primary science system according to Yuri Lotman, according to Roland Barthes, and a lot of semioticians, and all the other science systems are secondary science systems. We have been talking a lot about the anchorage. That is also a Roland Barthes concept that he used to explain the importance of slogans in advertising and the intended messages. So you have turned everything upside down, like Gianni Rodari in his Grammar of Fantasy, fairy tales upside down. And I have understood that when words fail us to describe something, images come into play. But I would like to ask you a question. That's really a very refreshing perspective, and I think it will be very useful to my students. But I would like to ask you a question. Roland Barthes claims that the text in advertising messages somehow help us to focus on one of the multiple meanings produced by the images, so that we could interpret and decipher the intended message of an advertisement correctly. As far as I understand, you also have an intended message, and your intended message if I understand you correctly, is to go beyond any limitations and to let children use their imagination, fantasy, contemplation, maybe just feel some delight, blissful delight. Have I interpreted well your intention?
I think you can feel delight, contemplation, but also deep understanding. It depends on the person, of course, but Roland Barthes, I've read this book and I agree with him. As I said, wordless picture books are almost wordless picture books, so they do contain text, and I do agree that this text, even if it's only the title, does give this help the reader to get the sense of the book right, or just get a clearer sense of the narration in it. So in my case, Induli, most of the people don't know what Induli means. I didn't know. So it keeps the ambiguity, the full ambiguity. I only I only play with the reader, telling him that he actually does have this detail, this textual detail, but he actually doesn't have anything apart my name and the title. So I actually do enjoy the fact that wordless picture books have the title. I have one wordless picture book that's called Sonho in Portuguese, and when you read through it, it doesn't have I can't remember, a narration that follows with actions. You know, it doesn't have a narration, and it helps me, the title helps me understand that this is actually a dream, and it's very intense and very visually rich. So with this only title, with this title, it helped me get the right impression of the book. So yes, he's right. I agree. It does help. It guides.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions or comments? If not, you were going to suffer, because I'm going to read a very quick quote from Hamlet, actually, which I thought of while Vyara was showing this. Sorry, Vyara, you said that the interpretation is open. And we are finishing in 3-4 minutes. So the quote is the following. It's a very, very famous quote from the play, actually. It's a conversation between Hamlet and Polonius. And Hamlet is saying, do you see the cloud that's almost in the shape of a camel? And then Polonius answers, yes, it is like a camel indeed. I'm simplifying the language, but I think it's like we don't need to go to Shakespearean language. And then Hamlet says, I actually think it's a weasel. And Polonius said, yeah, you're right. It does look like a weasel. And Hamlet says, or like a whale? And then Polonius confirms, very much like a whale. So I was reminded of this conversation when I saw the book represented with the clouds. And it's an interesting, I think, quote, because it shows that basically the limits of Polonius' interpretation are set by Hamlet. So he tries to please him by reading the clouds as Hamlet wants him to read them. And it seems to me that what you're presenting us is a scenario in which basically Polonius has no Hamlet. There is no limit of how the interpretation can go. And this is very, very interesting and very empowering, I would say.
When you don't have, when you don't have the limitations, you're stepping out of your comfort zone. And this is why people feel afraid to interact with a wordless picture book, because there are no limitations. There are limitations, of course, but they're very few, and this is what you just said, you know, it can either make you feel free, or it can make you feel lost and confused and out of your comfort zone.
I would like to quote a very interesting thought, a quotation again. And this quotation is by John Berger, Ways of Seeing. And it supports enormously what Vyara Boyadjieva has explained to us. Seeing comes before words. The child looks and recognizes before it can speak. So I think that your books are really very adequate in this context.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I muted myself. Too much silence. I think silence we don't want from a moderator in a Zoom talk. So sorry, here I will use my words. Thank you for the very, very, very interesting presentation. I think one potential thing we can do in the future is to collectively maybe read a book and set the limits of interpretation for ourselves.
Yes.
And yeah, I look forward to basically seeing, I won't say reading, but seeing more of your very, very good work.
You can say reading.
Thank you for agreeing to participate. We have recorded the seminar. So the way we usually do this is I will send you first the recording to have a look and say whether it is okay. And if it passes through your quality control, we will upload it on the webpage of the master's program for people who couldn't attend but were interested in the topic.
Yes, sure.
And yeah, thank you everyone for attending and wish you a very, very nice Friday evening with good images. Yes, we have also a clap from Camille. Thank you, Camille, for the very interesting questions. And yeah, goodbye. Enjoy your evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.